So with Startup Grind Tradition, the first question we always ask is, tell us about your background, your history. Who were you growing up?
Oh, we're starting so broad. Who was I? Well, I grew up on Long Island, on the South Shore, and my family didn't have a ton of money. My grandparents, who are from Italy, they lived with us in a two-family house, and so my mom was a really strong kind of female archetype in my life. She had a job ever since I was probably 3. She put me in nursery school when I was really young. My father lost his job. There was a lot of stress around financial sort of issues in our home. So I just remember really feeling a lot of, insecurity around finances in general. And I'm sure that many of you can probably relate to those feelings at some point in your life, especially, at the advent of starting a business too. And I think that those feelings and just seeing how my mom reacted, during a time of uncertainty, and really just sort of snapped into action and figured out how to actually, solve problems and really kind of take care of our family. It was a big family too, living in this small house. And she's always been a really inspiring person to me, even though she's a very complicated and difficult person. But she's always been incredibly hardworking and really disciplined and had an incredible work ethic. And she kind of gave me my very early passion for just working. And I always had jobs from the time I was like 12, and I was just really eager to learn and was always looking for mentors. And so I think that sometimes even in situations where you don't have a ton of resources, you find yourself becoming really resourceful. And I think that those are really rich times when you don't have a ton to work with. And I think that those early lessons really played a big part in the early days of Refinery as well, when you're figuring out how to make something out of nothing. And you're just forced to be really creative in those kinds of situations.
So in this creative environment, your family's dealing with financial issues. What did you do with your free time? Did you dedicate some of that to magazines and publishing?
You mean when I was 3? Or
how
early? Okay.
Let's say pre-college. Sorry.
Well, because of that, reading was like a really important escape for me, and we didn't have a lot of private spaces in our house, and I used to, constantly, sort of carve out a little corner and would read everything. I was a really early reader of like National Geographic and my mom used to have copies of the Christian Science Monitor, is that what it's called? There's just like all sorts of really strange magazines like in our house, and I would read everything, and it really kind of gave me a very early appreciation for magazine publishing. So probably from the time I was like 12 or 13, I knew I wanted to be a magazine editor. I just wanted to know how they made magazines, how you made newspapers, how stories came to life, who were the people that, that sort of created the pictures, the headlines, everything. And
any particular magazines?
17 was a huge seminal magazine for me. Seeing Whitney Houston on the cover was like a really, really big deal for me when I was growing up. And those are the first women's magazines that had like personal essays about, body image. And it wasn't just about, looking cute for boys. It was really just more about, there was fiction and of course, Sassy and Jane and all of those, sort of seminal young women's magazines. But I really loved men's magazines too, and music magazines. Spin was huge for me. The Original Details, Q magazine, which is a British music publication, Esquire, which I still love, and GQ. So those were all like really important. I was more just drawn to really good writing than I was necessarily to a gendered magazine.
Where did you go to college?
I went to school, it's the State University of New York at Oswego, and it was a really great school, and it was really affordable, and there were incredible professors there. One, Robert O'Connor, who's an extraordinary writer. He was my nonfiction professor, and he's still an important mentor to me today. And I had a double major in visual arts and creative writing. And yeah, I really I've talked about this a lot, but it ended up being a great school for me because it really had a great emphasis in the arts, but I really wrung every ounce of inspiration and knowledge I could from those 4 years. And I stayed up 2 summers and took extra classes so I could graduate on time with a double major, and it was really an important time for me.
Once you graduated, where did you head? What was your direction?
New York City, baby.
New York City?
Yeah, it's the publishing capital of the world. Yeah, if you want to get into publishing, you have to be in New York. You can't dick around. You have to just go there. And you live with 3 or 4 girlfriends in a 1-bedroom apartment. We've all done it. And you basically, at that time, this is the 90s, and we were still printing out our resumes on Selectric typewriters that had memories. They were the precursor to laptops, and eventually I got my laptop a year later, and it was this thick. But yeah, and I would literally go door to door and drop them off at every single reception area for every huge publishing company, and that's honestly how I got my job at the New Yorker too. So dreams do come true. Yeah, and it was, and I think that, I don't know, I just think that even though it seemed really impossible, even today when I actually meet with younger women and they're thinking about breaking into this industry and they're graduating and they're really nervous that they're going to be scrambling for the same 5 jobs with all of the people that they're graduating with, I think that everybody feels that way when they're graduating. I think that they always feel like there's going to be a ton of competition, but somebody has to get that job, and you just have to be determined that it's going to be you that's going to get it. And I think that that's just really, I just think that really drives you.
What was the experience like at the New Yorker? What lessons did you learn there?
I mean, it was such a pivotal time at that magazine. This was when Tina Brown took over as editor-in-chief. I don't know how many of you know who she is. She's I see someone nodding their head in the back, yes. Big fan of Tina Brown. She had just done incredible things with Vanity Fair, and before that she was a Tatler, and she was a really important editorial hero of mine. And the fact that she came around the same time that I became an assistant there, and she was really, she made some historic changes at that magazine that were, of course, in the beginning thought of to be incredibly, blasphemous in a lot of ways. She brought photography into that magazine for the first time and made, Richard Avedon the photography director. How do you say no to that? And it really set the stage for what that magazine is today. And obviously David Remnick does an incredible job with the New Yorker today, but she did some remarkable things with that magazine and took a lot of risks, and she wrote a lot as well. And she was just a huge hero of mine. She was really peculiar and eccentric in her own ways, but I just really admired her and just, was obsessed with, wasn't a stalker, but I would just see her in the hallways, and it's just really thrilling. It's like seeing a celebrity, someone that you really admire, and then there they are, just a few offices away.
Did that wear off? You were working there, you in a way idolized this woman. What drove you to want to move on from New Yorker?
I didn't want to move on. I got this opportunity. I was there temporarily. I was there filling in for somebody that was on maternity leave, and I don't know how much we can get off on this tangent. It's a little interesting, but Steve Florio, who was the president of the New Yorker at the time, he, unbeknownst to me, because I was a nobody, and it was super top secret, but he was being groomed to become the CEO, the new CEO of Condé Nast, and I'm sure many of you know what Condé Nast is. And it was a really big deal. There was a lot of changes coming. They were about to launch and fold a bunch of different magazines, and he, I don't know why, he confided in me and told me that he was going to be becoming the CEO of Condé Nast, and he needed a personal assistant. He had a secretary, but would I be a personal assistant? I didn't know what that was. It sounded interesting. There was a big raise attached to it, and he was like, you'll have access to every editor-in-chief that you want, and of course he tells you all the things that people tell you when you're about to take a job that you probably shouldn't take. But it was, and he was like, I don't think I've ever told this story before, but he had this office. It was it's ridiculous. It looked like the Algonquin, oak room, and he had a button under his desk that he could automatically shut the door really fast as you were like kind of running out, and it would like sort of hit you in the ass as you were leaving, or it would like lock you in, and if he didn't want you to leave. It was really kind of terrifying, and I'm sure he probably could have gotten sued for harassment now. If he were still alive, he's passed away since then, but it was like a really terrifying, you know, sort of prospect to be in that office knowing that that door, it was like not knowing when to get up and leave, because it had become kind of this like funny joke, like get out of the office before it hits you, and it was just like really stupid. But anyway, but he gave me a really great bit of advice. Sat me down, told me about all the opportunities. I told him I wanted to be an editor. I didn't want to be a salesperson or a publisher, but I wanted to write. And he asked me why, and I don't know how I knew this, but I'll always remember the answer I gave. I said, because you can't be a star if you sell advertising. And I know that's mean. I don't know if any of you want to sell advertising, but in my mind, I didn't think that you could be a star doing that. And I just felt like I wanted to make more of an impact with people in the world, and I didn't think I'd be able to do that by selling banner ads. And
you've got some balls.
Yeah, well, I didn't have balls enough, because literally he asked me what I wanted to make, and here we go. We're in the 90s. Who wants to know how much I was making then? It's my first job. Nobody wants to know? I don't have to tell you. I was making $22,000 a year. So you can imagine, as a young woman, I was thinking, like, what's the most amount of money that I could be making right now? Like, what would I feel rich, you know, if I were making? I was like, $30,000. $30,000 is like so much money. It's like I can go out to dinner, you know. I could go on a vacation. And he asked me how much I wanted to make, and he was just like kind of sitting back in his chair. And I was like, really, like, Meek? I was like, 30? And I just sort of like, you know, got it out, and he slammed his hand down on the chair, on the table, and he's like, sold. He's like, but you should ask for 40. And I remember it was like a huge learning curve for me. And everyone, when you're sort of like negotiating salary, it's like a good, think about me, that I could have been making 40. And it was really interesting when he said that, and I was like, really? You would have said yes? He's like, of course I would have said yes. He's like, I'm the CEO of Condé Nast. He was like a high roller. And that was it. So I took a detour. I worked with him for 3 years. I did learn a lot in that role. It was incredibly frustrating in a lot of ways too. I felt like a servant. And so there were sacrifices made, but I did meet a ton of incredible editors. James Truman was a mentor during that time. He was the editorial director, and Alexander Lieberman, I feel fortunate. He was the longtime creative director of Condé Nast, and I don't know if you know much about him, but he is like of Avedon status. He is such a visionary, and it was an incredible icon to me. I'd seen and read about everything that he'd ever done. I mean, he launched so many of those magazines, and he's really just one of the most important historical people in contemporary publishing, and I got to work with him, and so there were a lot of things that made it worth it, but I did take a detour. And should I keep going? I mean, I'm trying to speed it up.
That's okay. Well, I was going to say we could skip to the founding of Refinery29.
Sure.
After City, you worked at...
Can I say one other thing, though? Because I think there's another little piece of knowledge here. When I finally started interviewing for editorial positions, I remember I was 25 at the time, and this is awful, and I think a lot about when I meet with young women now, and how nervous they are about changing course after they've been doing a job for a while. They think they're getting too old, they feel like it's too late, and I remember meeting with, am I allowed to use profanity?
Yeah.
I think I said, okay, right. Yeah. I met with this executive editor, and he was really just like a total dick. And I was interviewing for an assistant editor position, and he asked me, had the balls to ask me, and of course, if I'd known then what I knew now, I of course would have reported him for doing this, but he asked me how old I was, and I told him I was 25, and he kind of like made a face. And then I got nervous, and I said, do you think I'm too old for this position? And he looked at me and he goes, almost. And it just made me feel like such shit, and I remember thinking like, well, even if he, who's in this position of power and is so accomplished, you know, wasn't in my corner, I still had to believe that I could make a change at that time, and it was a good thing, because I think that that moment really changed everything.
Refinery29.
Yes.
let's talk about how you met your co-founders.
Well, Piera Gilardi, who's she's one of our co-founders, there's 4 of us. She and I oversaw the early creative content, brand building, whereas Philip Bomborius and Justin Stefano oversaw business development, marketing, really building the site structure, and selling our first bits of advertising. But Piera was my intern at City Magazine, and that was the first magazine I ever launched after leaving Condé Nast after 10 years. And she just had the same kind of entrepreneurial spirit that I did. Like, she didn't really feel like she was going to fit in a traditional kind of creative sort of corporate environment, like an advertising agency or a publishing company. And there's nothing wrong with them, but you definitely have to have certain skills and be of a certain kind of personality to be able to work within a lot of those restrictions. And there's a lot of tradition that come with those companies, even though they're incredibly esteemed, and they open up a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities, but they definitely take a certain kind of person who maybe doesn't need to move as quickly. And I really had urgency issues, like I needed to get things done.
Do you think it's important to have a previous relationship with co-founders? Work-wise, friendship-wise?
I think it's important to have chemistry with your co-founders. I think that co-founders are a lot like soulmates in a lot of ways. I think sometimes you don't really know why you're drawn to each other, what your purpose is, the role that you're going to play in each other's lives, and you hate each other sometimes, but the most important thing is that you have that chemistry and you complement each other. And I think that the magic that really came together with the 4 of us is that each of us had such different skills and such different perspectives of life. I mean, Justin grew up in West Virginia, Philip grew up in Cologne, Germany, Pierre grew up in like a teeny tiny town in Maine, I grew up on Long Island. I was 10 years older than them, so I had a different vantage point in terms of just age and a certain level of sophistication. And I think that they also were just out of college, and they had a lot of energy and had access to all of these different kinds of resources and information that were available to them at NYU and Columbia. So it was really exciting. I don't know that there's a perfect formula for figuring out if your co-founders are a good fit. You just know and do a lot of homework.
What was the original intention with founding Refinery29? What did you set out to achieve?
Well, this is 2004 when we got together, and I'm sure many of you can remember what the internet was like in 2004. I mean, it was a world without Twitter, and there was just, department stores didn't have e-commerce. A lot of people were still talking at that time about the internet not being a thing, that it was going to somehow go away, and it was just all a bad dream. But those are the people that really weren't interested in adapting, and they're the ones that are probably paying the price today. But I think that what we were doing at the very beginning is kind of still very true to what we are trying to accomplish today as a global programming company. It's to solve problems for people and to use data to help dictate what the biggest issues are in people's lives, what their interests are, what their passions are, what they need to actually feel like they're living the best version of their life. And I think that in the beginning it stemmed from small boutiques that didn't have the resources to create their own e-commerce operations, and we became a network for all of them to connect through our platform. And it was really an incredibly innovative model at the time, where we had an interactive map that you could click on and hover over, and it was the 29 best independent boutiques in New York and in Los Angeles, and you could basically toggle between the West Coast and the East Coast. And at that time, it was just such an exciting moment in independent retail, and this is the time when Opening Ceremony was opening, and 10 Over 6, and Totokayo, and there was just these incredible, visionaries that were doing things on a smaller scale, but doing it in a really engaging way, and that was really kind of a great reflection of what was happening on the internet at that time too. These communities that were coming together and rallying around these interests that they had, these niche topics or these interests that they had, and it was really inspiring to see the reaction that we had, even though we thought we were going to evolve into an e-commerce platform that connected, that really functioned similar to Farfetch, it became our content that became our biggest asset and the thing that really set us apart from all of our competitors at the time.
How did you build the initial team?
How's this going so far? Is it good? Is it interesting? Okay. Just checking.
How did you build the initial team? What were the first people you onboarded?
The bravest people. We have, in our current office, we have about 5 floors in a building in the financial district. And we just started looking for a freestanding building because we're not allowed to have any more floors. We've maxed out on floors. And each of our conference rooms is named after one of our former shitty offices. And because it's important to really, and there's a description that sort of describes, what the conditions were in those shitty offices and why we have a real affection for them, because we did all of our really important work in the beginning in those spaces that we could afford. And I just still remember walking into our first, if you can believe this, there was a loft in a basement in Tribeca. Yes, it was a thing, and it was really disgusting, but it was huge by our standards. And I remember the 4 of us walking in there and being like, we had hit the lottery. We're like, this is amazing, and we immediately went over to IKEA and got all of our IKEA desks and started putting them together. And we had 3 other startup companies working with us in that space. And we had 2 bathrooms. One of them was really scary, and the other one was not so scary. And we actually hosted meetings, tons and tons of meetings with companies that have now become huge in that space.
How has publishing changed over time? I know you guys are pretty big on Snapchat. How has that filtered into your business?
Well, I think that it's a really interesting time in publishing, and I don't know how much of you read about the news, the industry news, what's happening in publishing right now, and the layoffs. Lots of people are losing their jobs. They're being eliminated. A friend of mine who's the fashion director, the executive fashion director, a year ago she was the executive fashion director for just Cosmopolitan magazine. Now she is the executive fashion director for Cosmo, for 17, for Redbook, for Women's World, for every magazine, every woman's magazine at the Hearst company. And, a lot of those people lost their jobs. And I think that what's happening is, I think that what could be happening and what should be happening is that the companies that do create content, knowing who their audience is and knowing how to create and deliver that content in the best conceivable way. I think that there's
monetize it.
I'm sorry?
And monetize it.
And know how to monetize it, yeah.
For 15 years, Simon & Schuster, Pearson, it's just they're all over the place.
Well, I think that there's a lot of disillusionment, but also people that didn't grow up in digital, and I'm not being ageist at all, I'm in my 40s, but there's a real apprehension about embracing new mediums, and they're confusing sometimes. I mean, I still have a lot of issues with Snapchat. The interface isn't really designed for me, but I figure out how to use it, and I try to figure out because I know our audience is using it. And I think that what you have to do is constantly be aware of where your user is going to get information. And you ask yourself, is that information that we have, that is available to them, but we're just not doing the best job of getting it to them? And I think that our strategy on Snapchat is different from our strategy on Facebook, which is different from our strategy on .com, which is different from our strategy in newsletters. And segmenting the audience is so important, figuring out what people are interested in. We have so much content on our site. We sometimes have 150 stories flowing through the channels in a day. I don't even read all the content anymore. And now that we have offices in the UK and in Germany, and we're expanding to Asia next year, that's a lot of information. And I think it's just so important that people are on top of the behaviors on those different platforms, and just somebody has to be an expert in those platforms. Somebody has to be the one. Doesn't have to be me, but somebody on the team needs to know every single thing there is to know about Snapchat and what people are doing on it, who's winning, and how, what we're sucking at, how we can do it better. I mean, the way that we launched Snapchat, a year ago, Snapchat was nothing to anybody. And now it is one of the most important is one of the most important platforms to be building an audience on and to be monetizing and building a road into the future, but also being prepared to know, like, is peach going to take off, or it didn't take off, or vine's going away, and understanding just like it moves really quickly, but surrounding yourself with people that have that appetite, have that metabolism for all of that information. And you don't have to be great at everything. Like I was just saying, I'm like not a huge Twitter person. I read a lot of news on Twitter, but I'm not really that passionate about communicating on Twitter except during the debates. And you know, Instagram's more my platform. It's a medium that I feel really comfortable with, and it feels really in line with how I like to express myself. And I think the same goes for us, but it's really knowing the span of our audience. You know, our audience, it runs from probably 16 now to the upper end of 30, 38, 39, but the sweet spot is 18 to 25, and that's like, the majority of our readers are in that space, and knowing what they're using, why they're using it, and how, and it was really interesting sitting in a focus group of 18-year-olds. They're all sophomores in college. They didn't know I was a partner in the company. I was there in disguise. I was like Ruth Reichel from the Times. And I just, basically was, there, as an analyst. And I asked them towards the end, I said, how would you describe, your social media? Like I want you to describe Facebook for me, Snapchat for me, and Instagram for me. And it was in Twitter. And they immediately, like all sort of in agreement, told me that Twitter was their newspaper. And I thought that was like so interesting. Like a lot of people would say the New York Times is their newspaper, or the Wall Street Journal is their newspaper. And for them, it's not about where the news is coming from. It's about who's recommending it to them in their friend circle. And that's a huge responsibility, making sure that information that's going through those channels is authentic, it's well reported, that it's researched, and I think that's like a big shift in how people are consuming information. And we have to think about that too. People might not know that the content that they're picking up through social or Facebook is from Refinery, so it has to sound like us, it has to be branded like us.
Hey Christine, I'm an average guy or girl going to startup grind once a month.
Yeah.
What kind of staple pieces should I have in my closet?
Oh, we're just like pivoting now to what to wear.
What to wear?
I mean, I think, so funny. We're gonna
Advice.
I mean, it's different for everybody. I mean, it depends so much on what you're comfortable in, what you like, what inspires you, what makes you feel good. I mean, honestly, for me, I think that I still struggle with this sometimes because I always have a lot of events and things to go to, is like feeling like you have something in your closet. And this is really just talking about a problem solver. It's not about being superficial or vain. It's just about literally being prepared. It's like having an emergency kit. And it's just having a couple of outfits that make you feel great, like the best version of yourself. And it's honestly, especially for all of you, I'm sure most of you have to go to meetings, have to present ideas, have to seem convincing, be comfortable in your own skin. I think having something that you wear that makes you feel like a total baller is hugely important. And if you don't know what that is and you don't have it, if you can't think about what that thing is in your closet, you have some shopping to do this weekend.
I was interested in your comments about purging your closet.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about that. Why?
Yeah. My husband's up there in the back row. He knows there's a big pile of stuff that's going out in the next week. I just think, is anyone listening to the new podcast that we just launched in Refinery? Oh, thanks. Did you listen to Norma Kamali this morning?
No.
Oh, okay.
Here.
Oh, you did? Thank you. Norma's a big inspiration. She's an incredible designer, but
Tracy London made me cry though.
she's really she's a superstar. Yeah, people love her. Yeah, being out with her, it's like she is really she's like a Kardashian. People just are obsessed with her. She's better than a Kardashian. Thank you. But Norma had this great story about how she felt like a prisoner of all of her beautiful things, and she had an archive of 20,000 samples, and she just one day she just decided to get rid of it all, which of course made me want to have a stroke. And I was like, oh my God, because I'm looking for it all now on eBay, and because I love her, and I think that her vintage pieces are important. They should be in museums, and I think that that's good advice. I think that when you hang on to stuff from your past, it's not just about clothes. That you just don't really play a role in your life. There's that sort of I can't remember. It's from Balinese. It's like a Balinese spiritual sort of saying that every possession you have has like an invisible string that's attached to you in your psyche, and the more things you have, the more sort of subconscious weight you have on your decisions, on your ability to move quickly, to make to sort of make changes in your life. You don't want to feel burdened by your stuff, and I feel like anybody that I give this advice to men and women, everyone. I feel like when you open your closet in the morning, if it makes you sad, then you need to do something about it, because that's just the worst. See, you're laughing. Does your closet make you feel like crap about yourself?
Half of it should be thrown away because
Well, I'm sure that you're not the only one in this room. I think that it's something, and then there's just nothing like that feeling of like rebirth when you take all that stuff to, Housing Works to the Goodwill, and you're just like, oh my God, and you never even missed it.
How do you deal with the pressure of always having to look good in public?
I don't think I do. I don't think I do. I think that I would have to say, I'm going to be really honest. I think that looking at pictures of myself now as a woman in my 40s, it's challenging. And I think that, this industry is really, really tough on aging. And I don't ever want to be that person that's afraid to be who I am, to be expressive, and to not feel like I have to have like full hair and makeup and and stylist support if I want to go out and speak. I just want to be myself, and I also want to project a really a realistic image of just like what a busy woman like myself, how I sort of like to sort of pull myself together. But I think filters are really helpful, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I use them occasionally. And I don't know, I just think that there has to be, like I said, I do have to spend time focusing on the things that make me feel like the best version of myself, because then I feel like that just helps me to channel the things that I want to say that I feel like are the most important.
Let's talk about structure in your day and how you balance your work with your life.
Well, I really love working. It doesn't feel like work to me. If an editor comes through and has a problem with an essay or a staff member or anything, it's like those sort of questions or those requests are really like important to me, and they make me feel useful in the world. I don't think that I have a hard time sort of drawing a line between my work and my personal life, but I'm lucky to have a partner that is really enthusiastic about the work that I do, and I feel the same way about his work. And I think that I think that the toughest thing is just not feeling overwhelmed by the competitiveness of this industry. It's so cutthroat, and even though I feel fortunate that Refinery29 is in a great place, it may not always be in a great place. We struggle and we work so hard every day to make the people that, that make the donuts every single day feel and like they know how important the work that they do is, and that the mission of this company and the content is so much bigger than just the company. And it's just important to always come back to that sort of purpose and believing that the mission has a purpose.
That is huge, because corporate loyalty has pretty much left the entire culture of America. So it's great that you empower and really acknowledge your workers, because that's going to make them so much more powerful when they get back to you in return.
I agree with you, and I think that when I think about how little encouragement I got specifically from other women when I was coming up, and there were so many women that were older than me that had amazing experience that could have been so much more supportive and encouraging, but instead they chose to be competitive and to do shitty things. And I see I see people doing that sometimes in the industry, and it's really disheartening, and I think that it comes from fear. When you know that it comes from fear of you not getting the acknowledgement, or you not getting the credit, or you not getting that sort of bit of support. And you have to remember that there's enough for everybody, and that, I do think that sense of goodwill is contagious. It literally multiplies, it's exponential. There's always enough for everybody, and there is no good ever comes from leaving someone out of a meeting, or not giving them the information that they need. And I think that's just not how we do things.
Women in business, who do you look up to? Who inspires you to keep going?
I mean, I really look up to my peers. Leah Chernikoff, who's the editor of Elle.com, she's brilliant and so creative and a kind and wonderful and supportive person. And Lauren Edvik, who is the former editor-in-chief of Fashionista, she's also super smart. She works from London now. Lauren Sherman, who's in business of fashion, she's fantastic. But also women like Norma Kamali, who have been so generous. Ariana Huffington has been like an extraordinary, lovely person who's just been so open and generous with her time and with just her like sort of positivity and optimism. I think sometimes that's all you need, is that access to people, and to feel like somebody cares about your journey.
Totally.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally.
What's next for Refinery29 creatively? What's on the roadmap?
Video is continuing to be a huge focus for us. One of the greatest things that happened this year was Amy Emmerich, who was our head of video. She came from Vice and Scripps, and she's a genius. And she talks so fast sometimes I'm just like, I have to put like a Sharpie in her hand so she can just like slow down, because she can only actually sort of like walk through strategies when she's in front of a whiteboard. And sometimes, she speaks a language that I don't always understand, but she's so smart and so kind of future-facing in a way that I've just encountered so rarely. Like, she's just constantly ahead of the curve. And when Snapchat, and she did this, as head of video, and she's now our chief content officer, and she's such an incredible person in that role because of the way that, for many reasons, but the way that she handled Snapchat when that became an opportunity to be on Discover, and we had to immediately, one day, it was like we had like one story on Snapchat a day, and the next day we needed to have 14. And it was like, how are we going to do that? And there wasn't a lot of data at that point. No one really knew what was working on Snapchat. No one really knew who was on Snapchat. It wasn't about followers. It was about engagement. And there was just a lot of different conflicting, bits of information out there. And she just was, I was telling Vina today, where's Vina? Hi. I was telling her today on the phone, she just snapped into action and just figured it out. She basically took an audit of the entire company, 450 people, who were like the super users of Snapchat at that time. She basically interviewed them. She, found out who was game to just like take on an extra job. She threw them in a room of, there was 15 people. Within like 3 weeks, we actually had a finely tuned operation that was churning out 12 to 14 stories a day. And, our position on Discover was really hard won, but I think it was because she just knew how to figure out how to actually get in there and make stuff and do it in a way that was very much in line with our brand and had respect for that medium. So we kind of had to sort of fly blind a little bit at first, but I mean, it was really an incredible process. And then all of a sudden, all the other companies started tapping, calling the people in our Snapchat team to see if they could take them to lunch and pick their brains and, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that the poaching situation in our industry is so fierce. And, I feel like I'm having a conversation every 3 weeks about, okay, you're considering going here, what are the opportunities they're offering? What is it about your opportunity here that feels like, maybe you want to grow more? And It's just the reality of the industry that and the pace at which we work. And I think that that's true of, we were talking about it earlier, the fashion industry too.
Yeah, fashion industry, unlike tech, people want to see you fail, I feel.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow, it's so discouraging.
Advice for entrepreneurs and student startups, students finishing grad school. What kind of skills should they have entering the workforce, publishing or otherwise?
I mean, that's impossible for me to actually answer. Because I think that it really depends on the kind of business that you want to go into. I mean, I think the thing for me that really sealed the deal was that I was so deeply excited about what I was going to be working on when I got together with Philip, Justin, and Piera. It didn't matter that I wasn't making money. It didn't matter that I was working 5 other jobs to pay my rent and to figure out how I could work at this, shitty office downtown, 4 days a week while I worked this other job just to cover my bills. It becomes a joy and it doesn't feel like a drag. And I think that making sure that it's a business that you really, really believe in, that you don't, and I think that you just know it and you feel it, and I'm sure a lot of you have gone on meetings where you didn't believe it. You didn't really believe in what it was you were pitching or what you were being pitched or, what someone was trying to get you excited about. And I think that you have to really tap into that passion, that feeling. You have to be honest with yourself because you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you don't believe in what it is you're trying to sell because no one else, I'm sure they talk about this in a place like this, that no one is going to believe it if you don't. And I think that was why we got such incredible support in the early stages when we didn't have the scale to back it up. But I think because they believed in our determination to make this something important in women's media that didn't exist yet. And now all of our competitors are, you can see them kind of borrowing from all of those early things that we did.
Last question. What's the best piece of advice you've ever got, aside from asking more on a salary, having balls, being risky?
As an editor or?
As an editor.
As an editor, I've told this story before, but it was incredible. But I think it's a great management lesson as well. When I first became an editor at Gourmet Magazine, which is was an incredibly historic magazine, just important in a lot of ways as the New Yorker, and I would, before even someone handed me a manuscript to edit, I would sit with all of the files of old stories that I'd read in the magazine by James and Michael Stern and David Rosengarten, incredible writers that I loved. And I would go through every version of a manuscript from the manuscript that the writer sent in to every version of edits till it got to publication in brown lines, which is basically the film that comes before you sign it off and it gets printed. And I became obsessed with just the process of how it actually got refined. And when I first got my first few features to edit, let me just tell you, I edited the shit out of them. And I thought that I was so smart because I knew how to do this, and I was going to be the best editor that David Rosengarten ever had. And when I sat down with our features director, when she called me into her office, and these are 10,000 word stories. These are a lot of words. And I'm feeling really good about myself, and she's like, let's just sit down and talk about this story. She's like, I want to talk about your edits. And I was like, okay. And she wasn't admonishing me or anything, but she gave me a red pen. And I know, you know where this is going. And she gave me a red pen and she's like, I'm gonna sit here with you and I want you to take me through every edit that you made to this manuscript. And I want you to just tell me if you think you made it better or you made it different. And I was like, this is a stupid question. I'm in my 20s. I feel like I know it all, and I did not. And I got it. It was 3 pages in, I realized that what I was doing was I was imposing my style, my voice into this incredible writer's feature, and I didn't realize it. And I think about that all the time when I'm sitting with young writers now, and I'm sitting with directors now, and they have an idea for me, and I'm really, really careful how I insert myself, how I insert my opinions, because there is a danger that we have of our own egos, interfering with the livelihood and the dreams of some other people just because we feel like we need to be relevant. We need to see our imprint on something. And I think that at the end of that exercise, which was grueling and so humiliating, and she never raised her voice or anything, but it was most, I think that we kept maybe 10% of the edits that I had in that story. And it was a great lesson, and I still think about that today.
Thank you so much for being here, Christene.
Anytime. Thank you.
We're going to open up for Q&A if anyone has a question. Yes. Sorry, just press the button.
Oh, yeah, sure.
What's the button?
So I just had a question about, oh yeah, there's microphones.
Technology.
I know.
Wow. It's like Star Trek.
We are in a spaceship.
Yeah, I know. It seems that way too.
So I have a question. You were talking about how this industry has changed and keeping up with the stream, the inflow. You said it was 150 articles or something posted a day.
It's probably more now because of the UK and because of Germany. I don't know the exact numbers, but
so
it's a lot.
Huge amount of content. And you were talking about the importance of making sure that's well researched and making sure that that's trustworthy content. And I was just wondering, especially during the last election and the talk on the media, if you could talk a little bit about how you as Refinery29 ensure that quality in all of these articles that are being put out so rapidly.
I mean, it's really how we hire people, because we don't have the luxury of having a full research department, which we should. I mean, we don't function like the New York Times, the way that they have a fleet of copy editors. And, we do have copy editors, and that's actually pretty unusual for a digital publication. But, we basically just still, it seems old-fashioned, but we still teach old-fashioned, journalism rules and just how to actually report, how to actually include attribution, making sure that your sources are, that you can actually reveal their names. And I think that and also just like even in the case of personal essays, making sure that they're not a crutch, and making sure that a personal essay is actually that format's being used because it's the only way to tell that story. And I think that it's making sure that they understand what the requirements and the boxes are to check for the different formats of how we actually share news. But I think that it's really, really hard because things have to move at such an insane pace. We publish in real time. When something's trending, in order for us to actually, get something live in time so we actually start to, track on Google and we're searchable, it's really, really rough. Sometimes we'll have to actually, go back to a story and make a correction.